everyone else to join. I was going to walk through a couple of thoughts on India and some of our views, at least as a fund, on why we think the market opportunity is interesting, and then I think we'll talk a little bit more about the companies specifically. So over the next 10 years, you'll see that India is one of the only economies to enter the $10 trillion club. This is one of the big reasons why everyone's excited, everyone keeps talking about it, why everyone's here. When we've seen other countries go through this type of growth over a 10-year period, those have been called the miracle years for the country. So that's basically where we are right now. We're looking at a point in time where we're starting our miracle years, and we're going to see this 4x growth, and with that will come a lot of changes in consumption and manufacturing, services, areas that we can go into here. So here again, it's a 2.5x growth over the next 10-year period to get to 10 trillion. Over the last couple of years, we've seen that the Indian stock markets on the public side have outperformed pretty much all the other indices in the world. So that's a good sign. India accounted for 46% of all real-time digital transactions globally in 2022. So here again, we're leading the way on the financial services side. You can see here 2/3 of all Goldman Sachs employees are now in India. Actually, last year, Goldman held their overall board meeting in India. Google's second largest campus in the world after their headquarters is going to be built in Hyderabad. So yet another data point to look at and the importance of it. 99% of all mobile phones sold in India are now made in India. And this is going to be really important as we think about manufacturing and the ecosystem that's enabled around that. Our infrastructure is skyrocketing. I'm assuming many people have either come from or been to Bangalore recently. But what was more interesting to me was we had 74 airports in 2014. Today we have 148. And in terms of kilometers of roads, and this is actually the road, the Bombay-Delhi highway. For everyone here, the coastal road will soon come, and we'll be on that picture next year. But this kind of infrastructure is definitely helping. So when we think about this in the context of the country, we think about 4 real drivers. Consumption, which I think we'll spend some time talking about today in the context of digitally native brands for consumers. Exports, government, and private capex. What's happening over the course of this time as this economy is growing, our triangle is becoming more of a diamond, and I think that's reflective of the kinds of changes that you'll see in consumers as well. Our wants are being replaced by needs, our needs are being replaced by wants. This was the Apple store right here at Geo Mall, and you can look at the crowds outside that. I mean, this is the kind of aspirational products that are now coming in, and that's reflected also in household income and household consumption going forward. It's going to have a secular impact across the board, whether it's in cars, flights, F&B, medicines. We've seen it in China when their economy went from 2006 to 2016 through those miracle years. They saw massive growth in car sales, in flights. They've seen a 3x growth in F&B, in medicine. So all of this is happening and is going to happen and get accelerated. The question is, which are the brands that are going to partake in it, and how is that going to evolve? I'm going to flip through a couple of more of these to get to some of the more interesting ones. By the way, if anyone's interested in this, it's available on our website, so you can look at it. But all of this is seeing, what I was saying earlier, the emergence of brands across categories. So, and the question is, which of these brands will succeed? How will they succeed? What will be their value add going forward? Other countries, when they reach their inflection points, you saw in the 60s in the US, the emergence of big consumer electronics brands, apparel fashion, fast food, automobile. The same thing in China. When they went through their miracle years, you saw the emergence of these brands. That's what we're sitting at the inflection point of right now, and over the next 10 years, you'll start to see those start to come about here also. Hi. How are you? Good to see you. I think we're waiting for one more person, and I'm just entertaining everyone with some slides. Now, I guess when we've thought about consumption, we've looked at it from the lens of there are utility brands and then there are discretionary brands. And actually, this is something that we can all talk about a little bit later as well. In the context of utility, utility brands, if you took a bag of rice, someone like D-Mart sells a bag of rice for 400 rupees, and they're able to generate a healthy EBITDA margin off of it. When you get over here to Nature's Basket and they're selling a bag of rice for 560, it's considered too much of a commodity to actually merit that premium. And Nature's Basket as a business will struggle to make the business work by trying to put a premium on a commodity without really differentiating it. However, if you look at apparel, you can see that the street vendor at 200 rupees can make money, as well as the luxury guy at 5,000 rupees can make money. So I think when we're thinking about the brands and the nature of the brands and the products you're in, it's important to understand whether you're in a utility or in a discretionary category, and the rules and the process changes and looks very different. And actually, it'd be very interesting to think about flowers and fashion in that context and really understand, or beauty, really understand how it's working. We have it in our context, in the context of a Bombay shirt company, and I'm not going to go into a lot of the details on this, but again, like I said, I'm happy to talk more about it, but I think it'll be more interesting to talk in the context of the businesses that we actually have here. But here again, apparel has that sense of something to differentiate on. Consumers are looking for something different. I'll give you an example of one where we felt that it was less focused on discretion. Actually, we didn't put it in here. I'll come back to that in a second. So Zeno Health is a pharmacy business. This is one of those categories where we actually think it's more utility than discretionary. So solving for cost is more important. So here we focus on selling drugs at a lower price and focus on generics. And you kind of have to focus much more on supply chain disintermediation, much more on cost savings there, and really look at offering the customer the same molecule at a lower price. So that's the kind of difference between the two in terms of utility versus discretion. I want to come to one other area that I think is interesting. Yeah, so education is one of those areas where, again, I think we have a challenge. We have 80% of our population at the working age, and one would argue that actually we have to worry a lot about our demographic dividend not becoming a demographic debt over the coming 10 years. And if you think about it, education as a product has not achieved product market fit. 28% of students are the ones that graduate from secondary school. So that's a large number of people just not completing education. And when you think about this, actually, here's some interesting quotes. Corporate jobs are not proving to be sufficient to sustain. This is an engineer who gave up his job to become a cab driver. Maids work in multiple houses and make more money than engineers in jobs. So the whole idea, actually, there was a quote on one of these. Our top 10% are rankers, our remaining 90% are bankers. And that's the kind of mindset that's gone into a lot of education and tuition and that kind of stuff, or tuitions that are going on. So 80% of India's manufacturing workforce starts without formal training. Here again, there's interesting opportunities to use AR, VR, to really ensure that people are stepping in and reducing productivity loss, increasing and avoiding accidents and errors. So these are the types of businesses that we are currently looking at to try to say, look, what can be done to improve our situation as we're projecting the growth. The other thing I wanted to talk about is this. We're exporting people around the world. And if you actually go back and look, on this side, everyone knows about all of the Indian CEOs of all the companies. I was actually surprised to see that 38% of all nurses in the world are Indian. And when you back out the ones in India, you still end up with 27% of all nurses globally are Indian. So clearly, we're training people for a variety of jobs here, and perhaps that's the opportunity going forward as well, is how education can meet those opportunities and those needs in the future. We account for 45% of global capability centers in the world are in India. So this again is a great training ground for the future. You know, I'm going to actually stop here and switch over to actually one last topic. Manufacturing is another big one for us. So currently, it's only 3% of the global share of manufacturing, 13% of our GDP, which is at a 60-year low. And this is really important because if you look at our deficit, we can solve a large part of it, electronics, machinery, chemicals. If we can start figuring out how to make more of this stuff in India and export it, that flips our entire equation in terms of our account deficit. Now, this is going to happen because you're going to start to see what happened in Vietnam, for example. In Vietnam, in 2009, both India and Vietnam were at about $6 billion in terms of electronic export value. Over the next years, what happened was Samsung, Intel, Foxconn, LG all entered Vietnam. When they came in, they built an ecosystem around them, and around that ecosystem grew an export market. So while our export market moved to 16 billion, theirs moved to 110. And so this is what's going to start to happen here now. You're going to start to see Apple, Samsung, Micron have all started to set up shops here. As they do that, they will start to enable a whole supply ecosystem around them. And what happens is China today has 151 suppliers to Apple, employing 6 million people. In India today, we have 14 suppliers employing 150,000. As that number grows, you'll see more companies grow around it, more entrepreneurship happen around it, more innovation happen around it, and that's going to be really exciting for manufacturing moving forward. Finally, the last area that we talk about is just climate. India's problem is the world's problem. So we employ 150 million people in agriculture. It's 17% of our GDP. But here's what was interesting. When we banned the export of non-basmati white rice, this was a sign in one of the supermarkets in the US. 1 bag of rice per family except basmati rice. So the impact of the climate and the impact on our agricultural system does affect the rest of the world as well. So I'm actually going to stop there, and I think even though the last person isn't here for our panel, I think we should probably go ahead and get started. Like I said, if anybody's interested in this information, I'm happy to share it. It's on our website, and we can get into it there. But why don't we switch? I just want to shut that off. Well, okay. So, do you have a mic? No, you do. You have a mic? Great. All right. So we met a long time ago in the context of Baby Chakra, and a lot has happened since then. Maybe before I go into all the questions I have about now and the future, you can just talk through the journey of there to now and how that's gone?
Sure. So first of all, it's fantastic to be here. There's so much energy outside. I walked and there was this wave of energy and wave of conversation. So super excited to be here. And Sandeep, great to see you again after many, many years.
Yeah.
You know the story of Baby Chakra, right? I mean, if we start with the whole premise that maternal and child health needed solving, at a much larger scale than it was being solved at earlier with the power of digital behind it. And we created what is today India's largest platform for maternal and child health in some sense, right? Because it's not purely healthcare focused, it's more sort of a consumer journey through pregnancy, childcare, with the intervention of 10,000 doctors and through a community-based approach, all done online. The journey, however, for me, I think the Entrepreneur 2.0 journey was actually in August 2021 when we merged Baby Chakra with then Glamm. And I joined Glamm as a co-founder. So at that point in time, it was Glamm, Baby Chakra and PopExo that came together. And then next, I think 24 to 36 months have just been breathless execution, to put it very mildly. We were fortunate to partner and acquire 12 companies and hence, multiple founders and multiple teams along the way.
So I actually want to stop you there. So
sure.
This is the whole vision of content, commerce, community working together, right?
Correct.
Because that was even Baby Chakra's thought process at the beginning was if we can cultivate the community of people who are interested in this issue, we can address them more effectively, retain them, convert them. Is that playing out in the larger scale?
Spot on. So I think with Baby Chakra, what we found was very strong product market fit and certain scale on the whole content, the 3 Cs, right? Content, community, commerce coming together in a very effective way. And of course, our commerce journey at Baby Chakra started much later. We launched our own products much later. We had done a marketplace pilot earlier, which was successful, but our own private brands, like our own personal, like private label brands, started much earlier. I think with Glamm, what we found was a much larger canvas to play on. I think especially with the acquisitions, because now we have a whole bouquet of brands that cut across the spectrum for a woman consumer, right from when she's a teenager and exploring menstruation products with Sirona Hygiene, one of our marquee brands, onto, of course, early jobbers exploring the first lipstick with a Glamm or a PopExo, onto mothers with Baby Chakra Moms Co, another one of our acquisitions, and onto more mature women, but also like women who are much more enthusiastic, much more aware about skincare, beauty, hair care with Saint Botanica and with Organic Harvest.
So does it matter to the consumer whether these are under one company or not? Do they see it that way? Do they care?
So the front end is absolutely like different brands, right? Because this is a brand journey. You kind of associate yourself with specific brands. You have brand love for specific brands, right? The mission that they stand for. And of course, we've very well-defined missions for each specific brand. At the back end, however, what we've done, I think especially, quite serendipitous in the time of, cookies being sort of commissioned out of service by Google, the privacy laws, etc. We actually have a unified data backend where all our users are actually now put into specific cohorts. And then we're able to kind of predict, okay, what is the kind of product that she would like now that she's used this other brand of ours or the specific product of ours, right? So one very clear, clear synergies, of course, with Momsco Baby Chakra, right? Momsco has a large bouquet of mom first brands, right? So mom skincare, mom hair care, mom pregnancy, stretch marks, etc. And Baby Chakra is a mass market play in the baby care range, right? So then they kind of cross-sell, upsell each other as well with the same customer. But even more so, interestingly enough, we see like from menstruation, like menstruation needs, we see that post-pregnancy, for instance, how do people then get back to like discovering newer solutions for their menstrual hygiene needs?
So actually, I want to switch over to Pawan for a second because you've taken a different thought process of a single brand to address varying needs. So I guess you've decided that and flowers, but although I know now there's cakes and other products, but do those also exist under the same brand, the same umbrella? Does it create trust in a different way, do you find? What's the logic for why you've opted to keep one consistent brand through the different journeys?
So, out of all the $100 million which we are going to do this year, flowers is barely 35%. Cakes is another 35%. And follows by plant, personalized product, and so on. Having said this, once you have reached to this kind of scale, we are now feeling the need of launching into a different brand for cakes especially, to address your question here. Okay. And of course, it's going to be an uphill journey from here onwards to launch a new brand for cakes. And
why are you feeling that need?
Because eventually, when you go with FNP cakes does not really sound something very enticing or something very new. And because we being a legacy 30-year-old brand, we started in '94. So with today's time.
You know, it's interesting you say that because we've had this conversation at Rebel Foods where we run multiple food brands. And we stumbled into this problem because it went from a wraps brand called Fasos, tried to sell biryani, and realized the customer didn't want that biryani from a guy that sells wraps. Then you say, and then Jaydeep articulated this idea of multiple food missions that people have. And it sounds like both of you are saying something similar, that women go through multiple phases or needs or requirements at times and have different brands that are required for that. And now you're finding that cakes apparently need that.
So we are into celebrations, we are into gifting. And with flowers, cake very well gelled into it. So there was no reason why we should not do cakes. And so much so that we are doing something around 5,000 cakes a day. So if that's the number, why not have a separate brand for cakes altogether? So that's the journey.
But it wasn't a requirement at the beginning because it was celebration. It was okay.
So we thought FNP was the mightiest brand, and that's how cake should be sold. But I think everybody learns, and we realized why not do a differential brand with a different product offering a different reason as to why should it exist, and we'll start a new journey from here.
Bharat, welcome.
Sorry.
No problem. So we're talking about brands and the range of brands required for different needs. So I know you're in the coffee space, and I was looking at Blue Bottle earlier today as I was just thinking about this, and it's quite interesting. Someone narrowed down Blue Bottle to saying that, look, there are three people in life. There's people that don't drink coffee, there's people that drink coffee at home, and people that drink coffee out. And they then said, the ones that don't drink coffee, irrelevant. These two are relevant. Then when you get to those, you say people that want average coffee, lower than average coffee, or better than average coffee. Right? And then you segment in this manner, and then they ended up at, so therefore Blue Bottle's universe of people that are relevant for them was high-end people that are drinking coffee out, let's say was their market, which narrowed it down and narrowed it down and narrowed it. And so you end up at a very specific target market. When you guys have thought about your market and how you're going about it, did you come to a view like this, or did you say that, look, we're going to get everybody in coffee and we're going to end up with price points across the board, or how have you looked at it?
So I think America and Europe is like really advanced in the way their coffee consumption habits are. So they're already way ahead in the coffee drinking curve. Almost per capita coffee cups they consume is very high compared to some of the Asian countries, which typically like India and China have been tea drinking first, single serve first. So I think depending on the need of the consumer there at that time when they entered, I think they have cracked, or they have looked at a model which was to do with out-of-home coffee, but talking a lot about single origin and talking a lot about the fourth wave of coffee. Whereas when we entered the market, the penetration of coffee in India, if you look at the northeast and west markets, is, when we entered, it was at about 14, 15%. Today, it's gone up to about 20%. In south, it's about 35, 40%. So we are very early in the days of coffee consumption in the countries, first of all. So for us, we really had first of all, a very long-term viewpoint, which was not in a couple of years, but I think when I started, I had a multi-decade viewpoint. So the idea was to create a powerful brand that can encompass at-home as well as out-of-home coffee in various formats.
And do you think that there's a premium or unpremium aspect to it, or is it we're just entering in the middle? Where are you positioning as for that?
So both at-home and out-of-home, kind of have different positioning to play with. The way I look at it is that it's very, very early for coffee in India. So you have to dumb it down. The more complicated it is, the less friction there is for the customer. And you cannot build a very large, sizable position if you just look at complicating coffee with, let's say, this kind of premium beans or this kind of roast or this kind of packaging or only this channel. That's not going to work. So the thesis was quite simple, to look at the bulk of the market, which was the soluble instant coffee play. And then now we have diversified into out-of-home. We do beans, but we still keep it extremely fluid and very simple for the consumer. I don't think the consumer is at a stage where they can,
They're not discerning.
They're not very discerning with a lot of things like, let's say in India, a lot of food and beverage products. So they're getting there. Another thing I would like to mention is the out-of-home coffee space is like not coffee first. It's real estate first. So it's about meeting. It's about, sitting down there with your friends or doing your work. So coffee is not the central theme per se.
It's interesting. In many of these businesses, you end up in ancillary businesses if you don't watch yourself. And I mean, I'm bringing it back here and say that, the content side is a complicated business. I mean, creating content, thinking about monetization of content, reach, versus the product side, which is about supply chain, margins, distribution. I mean, you said you've been executing relentlessly. I got to imagine it's challenging to keep all these different types of business models in one entity and structure. Have you found a simple way to make that flow work better, or do you deprioritize one in favor of another and say we're really driving sales, so whatever happens on the content side, it's okay as long as eyeballs are coming? How do you think about that?
No, so absolutely. I think in the process of integration and the process of actually, so there were a couple of choices we made along the way, of course, right? There are more no's than yeses that you do in this journey. I think the first choice we made was one that you mentioned, that we were like alluding to in the very beginning, that while the group is, we're going to kind of rename our group the Glamm Group versus it being My Glamm, PopXo, Baby Chakra, and then like having like multiple, brands sort of enter the paradigm. Like, let's just name it under one umbrella and let's centralize ops. Right? And of course, apart from finance,
but just,
HR.
Just that group labeling matters only as far as the internal team is concerned, right?
But that's where it starts, right, Sandeep? If inside there's not clarity, then outside there will be none for sure, right? So I think the main focus that we had as founders was to bring clarity and a very strong structure internally and to centralize where needed, right? So then so apart from like centralizing some very critical functions like operations and HR and finance and, our entire warehousing, etc., because then, of course, that gave us efficiencies of scale. What we said was, what are the other core levers we have as a digital-first FMCG conglomerate of the future? If you're digital-first, then content, community, and creators also needs to be centralized, right? And I think where we've aligned at now is that we are primarily in the business of personal care brands. We're very, very clear. That is our core focus. And everything else pretty much feeds into that core business.
And the synergies are getting recognized at the back end, you find?
Absolutely, absolutely.
I'll push a little bit on this. Thrasio, for example,
Yeah.
seemed to have been challenged in figuring that out on the synergies of selling on Amazon. But here, because you think that the brands are more organically built inside, is that why we're...
So let me explain the construct, right, and how the channels that really work for us, right? So we're in the very unique position, I think perhaps the most unique position, to have 70% plus of our, actually 65% of our sales come directly from like D2C, like pure play D2C from our websites, from our apps, which is extremely unique when you look at like how we talk about D2C in India. It's actually a bit of a hybrid D2C. It's more marketplace oriented versus our own website or app oriented. We're actually the reverse, right? Which actually is giving us, number one, the full information of our customer. Unlike other players, we really do know our repeat retention rates. We know where our customers are coming from, who they are, who they're referring. We have a very strong referral program. And this is where the power of content, community, and creators really gets unleashed, right? So yes, I think to your point, what we learned along the way was while you're building out content assets or you're building out community assets, and you oftentimes build them out with a very different business model when you're building them out, like, you know, in silos. The focus for us today is very clear. They all feed into the business of our brands, right? And while you might have chatter that's not allied, you know, to the brands, like it won't be like very brand, like it won't talk about, oh, Sirona's the best brand or my Glamm is the best brand for makeup, right? But it'll be inspiration-based chatter, right? So for instance, we have a large community of beauty aficionados, probably one of the largest, going to be one of the largest in South Asia, where we talk about inspirations on wedding, on makeup looks, on, you know, bachelorette looks,
And
whatever's trending.
Can competing brands buy ad space there?
They can today, and they will continue to, because in that sense, we're able to give that infrastructure. So, you know, I think, again, like I want to go back to serendipity a little bit, right? The time we acquired these content assets, the time we acquired these creator and community assets, right? We were getting them to partner with us, and they were already built at a certain scale. Today, you know, we have 250 million monthly active users on our content assets. That's insane. Wow. That's pretty much half of India's like people consuming content on Facebook and on social media, right? On Instagram. So we were able to get them at a much earlier stage, where I think the power of content and communities was still kind of underserved. And we were lucky to have gotten them, these assets at that point in time. So I think now that we have them, we're able to, for someone to build a content asset to that scale today would be pretty challenging, to say the least.
So Pawan, you've focused a lot more on the back-end supply chain as you've looked at flowers. And maybe I want to talk a little bit about how important that is, because we've thought about product distribution businesses. If you can control your supply chain, you can expand your gross margins, you can generate that mythical profit that's supposed to be happening for everyone, which I think you had found in one level. When you moved across verticals, when you moved across to cakes and everything else, you don't have the same supply chain strength. So you have to relearn, let's say. So maybe we can talk a little bit about supply chain, and maybe also if you can comment on this whole idea of content and community, and if it plays a role in the categories you think about as well.
Sure. To talk about supply chain, primary categories for us are flowers and plants, perishable. For cakes, there is already a set ecosystem of whatever raw material which one needs to get from. So brands like Pillsbury and so on are already very much available. It's a question of you developing your own manufacturing capability at a centralized location at a couple of places in the country, and thereafter sending all this into a cold chain to the respective subsidies. In case of flowers and plants, you do a backward integration in terms of tying up with the growers, and you have an ARCs with them so that they keep on supplying to you on your schedule. So that's as far as the supply chain goes. Whereas mostly when it comes to non-perishable stuff in whatever we need, majority of it is imported from China, or a little bit of it is within India. So that's as far as the supply chain.
So there was no complications for you in moving from, let's say, flowers to cakes? You found it straightforward?
Yeah, because it's a very well established industry. There was not much to...
Yeah, yet it's fragmented. Someone made this comment to me the other day. They said that there are 2 million birthdays every day in India. Which, is that accurate? Seems about right?
Seems about right, because we do something around maybe 15,000 a day. So something like that.
That's
be
quite a market. Yet, I'm not sure that there's a large cake brand.
So Monjini's in West, a little bit in East, and Just Bake in Bangalore and so on. So you have a couple of localized brands, but there's no national
But they're
brand.
regional, right? So how have we not seen, like, this is not a tech problem. It's just not been created yet.
So, the quick commerce guys, the food delivery guys are now revolutionizing this particular scale at which you can do it now. So the consumption on just a mom and pop store, which used to be at the locality based, is now slowly turning into a brand based opportunity wherein a single player can dominate a couple of cities and a couple of states. And it's a matter of another 3-4 years where you'll have at least a duopoly or three guys who can grow up big here.
Yeah?
As our friend mentioned, yes, it's early days for coffee, so it is early days for
Early days for
cakes.
cake. So actually, let's talk about the brand building in coffee. I know you've got a big cricket star involved in it. Is that the... Okay, I'll give you another statement that was made to me. We're a low-trust society. And so developing trust, the celebrity angle is a proxy for trust. And is that what you kind of recognized and said, okay, based on that, we should go in that direction? Because it's not necessarily talking about, and I believe your coffee beans are differentiated. There is something in that as well. I'm not enough of a coffee aficionado. I'm on that beginner side of the spectrum. So I would say that I like a good coffee. I couldn't tell you which one is good. But is that why you're going in that direction to build a brand? Or is that where you're going to build the brand?
So, for any packaged FMCG, CPG, food and beverage player, personal care, anything to do with, you're buying in a retail store, I feel like ultimately the product is the reason why you will be able to get some level of traction, but which could be 2%, 3% of late stage success, but early on, obviously, it has to be 100% of the success. Your product will speak for what you get. But eventually, it comes to a couple of these other layers, which is number one being distribution. So great product not distributed well is, not going to go far. So when we think about distribution in India, there's online, there's quick commerce, there's modern trade players. But I've always been of the opinion that we cannot build a large-scale brand that generates 10, 15, 20% PAT at scale unless you crack GT at scale.
Yep.
And we realized that very early on. So when you think about that in distribution and you think about the trade works on trust. It was not only for the consumers building, or buying into the trust of the brand, but it's largely the trade initially on. So the super stockists, the distributors, some of the people that work like vendors in between, who would do point of sales marketing for you, and the entire value chain. That really helped us as the starting point.
And do you, in creating this category, let's say, as you're growing it now, do you find the need to invest in content around it? As we talked about
we started building content. I mean, the content is the most important pillar. But for us, personal care works a little differently. But for us, we have to gain general trade, modern trade, offline penetration, because that's where the bulk of the consumption happens. And hence, content is, again, a proxy. It's a signaling that there is something. I'll give you an example. When Virat would do a reel, let's say for Rage, that would touch about 3 million, 4 million views in 24 hours. Doesn't mean that we see like 1% conversion on our, it doesn't happen. It doesn't work that way. So content in my world is replacement for ATL activities that you would have otherwise done, let's say, taken up, you would have knocked the city with your billboards, for example. Yeah. It's a controlled activity, ATL activity. That's the way I look at it. But it's all brand building, trust building at the end of the day.
So, actually, I want to make sure. Are we okay on time? Are we okay on time? Okay, I have another question, actually, first. Do you think about offline distribution? And so, in that context, it was interesting. The customer in the offline distribution, you were pointing out, may not necessarily be the customer. It's the distributor, the stockist, the promoters, the people that have to be involved at that last mile. Have you had to rethink your approach now if you're considering speaking to them and what that might involve?
No, so, I couldn't agree more with Bharat, and actually one very important point. The Glamm Group actually is backed by and invested in by a whole bunch of Bollywood celebrities, right? So we have Shraddha Kapoor, we have Akshay Kumar, we did a JV with Akshay, with Twinkle, with a bunch of them, Diya, Neha. And the reason we've actually chosen and we've had the privilege of working with them is also because with our offline channels, right, it matters. that these people are backing the brand. We've recently done a production deal with, a deal with Dharma as well. And that's one very unique one as well, where all the movies that Karan comes out with will actually have our products integrated, right? So we have 55,000 points of sale already offline. We don't have EBOs at this point in time because we stayed away from that. We've actually just done through our partnerships with MTGT. But as I think about it, more and more, how we're also now kind of mapping our digital footprint with our offline footprint is we're actually doing a bit of a hotspotting and saying that, okay, this is where our digital conversations and our offline conversations are actually converging, and these are areas where we're doing way better in our sales than other areas. And how do we kind of double down on the trends there and apply them in the other areas where we can grow at? So we're doing a lot of I think this kind of hotspotting exercise right now, which gives us a very strong understanding of where the consumers are really at. And I think more than ever in India. Now the GCC is a different market altogether, different beast altogether. But in India, you're seeing a lot of the digital chatter, at least in the metros and the tier 1 and tier 2s, really converge with the offline hotspots as well, which is very interesting for personal care.
Sandeep, you know what? The offline world becomes very, very difficult, painful, slow compared to the online world because of something you just mentioned. You just don't have to build trust with the trade. You obviously have to build trust with the consumer. You have to do both very, very well. You have to execute both of these really well over a period of maybe a couple of years, maybe decades, to be able to see that size and volume that that brands of India will hold tomorrow. But it's not that you will do only one. You will build the trade and there will be no consumer love and you will be able to do well. That actually will never happen. Maybe you have consumer love at scale and the trade will also accept you. That is a possibility.
So I
just want to add one little point there, and I think just to close on the point of the GCC, right? So India, I think, is a very unique economy because of that, right? Because we do have large digital first population, and also the offline is extremely significant, actually very, very significant. In the GCC, when we launched our brands last year, we actually launched offline first. So while internally we all say digital first FMCG conglomerate of the future, in the GCC we had to take a different approach because the majority of the internet conversations there is different from where it's already at in India, which is super interesting.
Yeah, we are not the developing economy in that context, huh? In that context. So, but Pawan, I wanted to ask the question of you because you've been in the offline world for a long time. Yet, I don't think there are many celebrities or that side of the equation needed. So how did you navigate that trust equation, whether it was with consumers or with franchisees, who are a bulk of, I think, your retail points today? What was the process for you?
So we being the first mover, that was an advantage. Started in '94, so almost a 30-year-old brand. And because of the franchise model which we developed, and we scaled up pretty fast. And with very little low capex and the kind of quality and service, and because of the exclusive brand, because even today if you try to recall a flower brand in the country, the way you're not able to do for a cake, you'll not come across anybody who has more than maybe 5 shops. And I'm talking about 300 plus. So the brand itself, the availability on high street, and the product offering, the customer service, all created the difference wherein we did not feel the need of having a celebrity. But then last year we raised money and we thought, now this is the time to grow it to XX. And that's when we had Anil Kapoor, who was here today. Of course, we full flat on our face. Nothing happened like that, as Bharat mentioned. But yeah, that was a good lesson, and continue and work on your basics. And that's how you grow steadily.
Fantastic. I think we should take some questions if there are any. Otherwise, I'm going to keep asking. Okay, let's talk about funding for a second. So you've talked about decades. You've been in it for 30 years. This journey's a little younger, but still seems like we're just at the start. Do you think these categories, and as an investor, I have to often ask the question, do these categories align well for the requirements of an institutional investor? Perhaps an individual family office has a different horizon. But how have you guys, and maybe I'll start here because you guys have probably raised the most amount of it and have the largest pressure in that category.
So I think the markets have already spoken, I think, quite definitively on our category, right? So if you're looking at personal care, I mean, the aspiration is in hopefully 2 years to list in India, right? And I think when you look at two trends, right? One is, of course, the whole trend on consumer itself. and you see India has some of the richest consumer multiples when companies list, right? And I think it's a very positive sign that's already been, I think, very, very clearly out there with recent IPOs, but also I think older, more incumbent companies that have gone public, and you see sort of their share price really doing well. I think the second piece to it is that, when you're looking at institutional investors, people are looking at the long-term play in India. I think everybody's betting on the consumer economy growing. You were doing a whole presentation on it right now, Sandeep, so I'm kind of preaching to the choir here. And we're seeing these trends play out very definitively, right? And the whole aspiration, the entire movement, right from the manufacturing hubs, the supply chain, the logistics, the payment, the digital payment infrastructure, the entire ecosystem, it's unlocking at a unprecedented scale. I mean, I was speaking at Vista Tech in France, in Paris the other day, a couple of months back, and UPI for them was this big innovation they were going to introduce for the Olympics to ensure that entries to to the Eiffel Tower, etc., could be made easier, e-commerce could be made easier. We are actually at a very, very unprecedented time in India, and I think a very special time in India. And this whole bet that we have of the $5 to $7 trillion consumer economy, you sent me a deck today, said $10 trillion, right? So we're already kind of ahead of that curve. So I think the market fundamentals are very strong for Indian companies. And when you combine that with the positive sentiment you've seen historically as well, combine it with the third trend that we are leveraging, which is the international play that we are already in, I think we're in a very strong place.
Okay. Oh, and you took in money after 20 plus years of not taking in money. What was different that gave you the conviction to say now's the right time to take the money and we'll meet the institutional guys' time horizon? What's new?
So when we raised money, we had a 70 odd crores in the bank, which we hadn't touched for a long time. And despite this, we went and raised money, one, because we were hearing from the entire ecosystem that you guys need to unlock the value. So yeah, we did unlock the value, and we all, the founders dipped our beak a bit in terms of a secondary, so that was a good sweetener. Having said this, institutional investment does bring in a lot of discipline in our way of functioning. That also brings in a lot of additional knowledge. And we have been able to set our house right. And a lot of practices which we were considering to adopt, we just started adopting it. And I think it's only a matter of from here where you can grow. So I would still believe that institutional investment does bring in a lot of discipline and growth mindset in the organization than what we were before.
So Bharat, you're early on that journey of fundraising, right?
Yeah, but I'm happy. Very, very happy. No, honestly, I feel like a couple of pointers. I feel like consumer companies should not gulp up capital. Like, it's just a very, they are not tech products that you can shove down people's throats. These are actual, if you're building a brand, marketplaces could be different. But if you're actually building brands in large categories, it's going to take time. That's the only hard, real reality that I can tell you, and that too with good metrics, like decent metrics. Even if you reach a 200, 300 crore scale and if you're burning like, to a 30, 40%, which a lot of them today are, and, I don't blame no one, but it's not something that I would be very excited about. Again, I'm talking about from investor's lens. As a promoter also, it's a choice one makes. So ideally, consumer companies should be able to generate healthy PAT in India at about 250, 300 crores, ideally. If that happens, I think the value creation for the next couple of decades can be very easily be seen by all the stakeholders involved. The second thing is that patience is needed. Ultimately, patience will be needed. That's the only two things. If the entry value for any fund, any family, whoever it is right, and they trust the business and the category, they should give it 5-7 years, money will be made in India in consumption. I mean, that's the very hard, broad rule that I have. If the entry value is right. If you enter at a wrong price, then, then it's not going to be a Meta or a Snapchat or a, Paytm.
So I've been doing private investing in India for 20 years. So I think patience is something I've definitely learned. There's a quote by Warren Buffett that says, the stock market is a great vehicle for transferring money from the impatient to the patient. Now, I think we're all saying that now's the time. Hopefully, the patience doesn't have to run very long, because I do think that, to your point, we're seeing the numbers. The scale is there. Hopefully, people have learned the lessons of burning irrationally, and the systems will start to work.